McCollum Wellness Radio Program on AM 1080 KSCO.
Good afternoon, Santa Cruz. Good afternoon, Santa Cruz. This is Dr. Duncan McCollum coming to you from another beautiful day here on the Bay. And I'm hoping everybody out there is having a great weekend. I am very excited about today's show. I have a new friend that I met on this app called Clubhouse. And if you don't know about it, you should check it out. There's some amazing information on there. A lot of good stuff on setting goals, health information. And I'm not even sure where we met Debbie, but we met on one of those chat rooms. And Debbie is a certified yoga therapist. She's been, about 10 years ago, she had her hip replaced and started to become conscious about the osteoporosis condition that is reaching a lot of people. In fact, there's a huge number of our population that are being exposed to it. Not only women, but men. 80% of the people affected are women, but still men have to be concerned and aware of it. So Debbie, there's a lot of letters after your certifications, and rather than me try to guess at what they are, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for being here. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what's motivating and what's your passion?
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I am a certified yoga therapist, and that is 1,000 hours of training. It's a clinical training, so trained by chiropractors, physical therapists, doctors, nurses. And in addition to my yoga therapy training, I'm also a certified health coach. And yeah, so that's what my training is. My passion is to help people realize that it is a use it or lose it proposition, and they will lose it if they don't use it. And I'd like to prevent them arriving to a place of broken or disabled, and really raise awareness to the need for using it so we don't lose it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so we're talking about osteoporosis, which is a loss of calcium in the bone, following something called osteopenia, which is the loss of mineralization. And we're going to talk about a lot of different issues as far as strengthening and keeping flexibility in the joints. And then kind of the chemical aspect I'll be touching on some of the factors that are related to people having osteoporosis or developing osteoporosis. So between the two of us, we hope to be able to give you guys a lot of information. So tell us your story. How did you get involved in this, Debbie?
So I had a hip injury that I sustained in my early 40s. And when I had to shift my whole life, I was playing tennis 5 days a week. I was spinning, running, and I could no longer do that. After about 5 years with that injury, I would take 3 Advil preventatively. When I would play tennis, every tennis match I would hurt afterwards. Sleeping was painful. So I went and I was diagnosed with a torn labrum in my hip. And I had a surgery to try to repair it, and it didn't work. So 2 years later, I had to have a total hip replacement when I was only 51 years old.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And for those of you out there who don't know what the labrum is, it's kind of like the discs between your vertebra. It is a cartilage protective mechanism that keeps the hip joint working well and lubricated. And when you get a tear in that, oftentimes it will cause the joint to wear prematurely. And so how did this get you interested in helping people with osteoporosis or flexibility?
So because I was injured, and I actually received my injury from a yoga teacher that pushed me and tore my hip, my goal was to show up as a teacher and to be as safe as possible as I taught, and to make sure that the movements that I was teaching were safe. And because I teach mostly to the 55 plus crowd, there are many issues and ailments that people have. So I found this course on osteoporosis, and I don't even know if I really even heard of osteoporosis before this, to be honest. Maybe I had heard of it, but didn't really think of it. The statistics of osteoporosis is what made me think, oh my goodness, I have to do this for people. And I have to learn as much as I can. And then over the years, that was in 2014, over the years, it's been like a magnet, because the population that has a diagnosis of osteoporosis, it really pulls the rug out from under you when you get that diagnosis. It's very unsettling mentally, emotionally.
Yeah, I can imagine, just it's like one of those things that you feel like it's a death sentence in a way. It's like, okay, well, now what's going to happen? We've all heard of our uncles or aunts or grandmas or even our mothers that have fallen down and broken a hip. And we know also that that's sometimes a misnomer, because what happens is osteoporosis occurs very silently. So you may not even know that you're developing it until sometimes it's too late and it's diagnosed after an injury. And in fact, sometimes the bone becomes so weak and brittle that it will break or fracture prior to a fall. So it's like my hip broke and then I fell, rather than I fell and broke the hip. It can go either way, but it's just really amazing, what happens with osteoporosis. And, especially because it's so preventable and reversible in so many ways. And so now you teach your 5 or 7 different classes at a local hospital down there in Torrance, right?
Yeah, I was teaching 7 classes a week, and I like to call it the pre-pandemic era. I was teaching live, and I really don't know when I'll go back to that kind of, in person. I didn't skip a beat, so I started teaching online and virtually right away. But I still
Yeah,
do teach for the hospital. I teach 2 Zoom classes for them.
that's great. That's so needed. It's so unfortunate that's what's happened with this whole shift in the pre and post era of COVID is, a lot of the reason that people have mineral loss or bone density loss, and we were talking about this earlier, is because of the health triangle. There's a physical component, uh, a chemical component, and then a mental or spiritual component. And the mental and spiritual component has been hit so hard in this last year, not only with COVID, but with the elections. And we became so fearful as a nation and maybe a world. And we know that the fear causes something called the fight or flight mechanism to occur. And that's basically stress, which shifts your hormones. And when you have increased cortisol hormone in your body for a period of time, it increases bone density loss, or the loss of calcium in your bone. So it's so important for us now to be able to take a look at what can I do physically to help myself? What do I need to do chemically and structurally, of course, as a chiropractor and as a yoga therapist? And then, how do I handle this fear that's been building up in me for so long? So over to you on that.
Yeah, so we're actually mind body entities, right? That triangular aspect is all connected. It's not just one thing or the other. So that stress response affects the biochemistry, or the biochemistry affects the stress, or the musculoskeletal imbalances, the postural malalignment. So everything is interwoven and everything has an effect on everything. So it's really healing ourselves at all of these different layers that becomes really important. It's not just, and that's why the recommendation that somebody gets after diagnosis is a medication. And a medication is so specific and targeting one aspect. And I'm not really going to go into medications because I'll let people search for themselves on all of the side effects and what exactly that is. It does nothing for the mental emotional layer. It doesn't do anything else for the other physical aspects that are important if you have osteoporosis, like balance, joint coordination, joint range of motion, resiliency in the joints if you do trip or slip. And I like to tell my students, this might sound silly, but I like to say, I'm going to help you become a better faller, better at falling. Because we're always going to trip and we're always going to do things. It's how well does your body absorb and receive that motion in the joints so that it minimizes pulling on the joints and fracturing, getting a stress fracture.
Yeah, that's exactly right. If you just kind of imagine somebody falling this like a telephone pole and hitting the ground because they have no flexibility, that's impactful, rather than having all of the different joints kind of go into a fluid motion and perhaps learning how to fall. I did gymnastics a lot as a young kid when I could, and I learned how to fall. So and when a lot of times people have those injuries, and they can, if they were more flexible, they could maybe get their hip out of the way rather than landing on it and fracturing it in that case. So now, what kind of stuff do you teach your patients or in your classes that might be helpful for the people in our audience today to be able to visualize?
Well, I just want to say one thing about the falling. I cannot tell you how many people over the years started teaching this in 2014. I cannot tell you how many people have come up to me before or after class to share with me a huge fall that they had, that they're so shocked they didn't damage themselves, hurt themselves, or break themselves. And they attribute it to all of the years and the work we do in the yoga practice. So what specific things? Well, I actually am extremely visual, and I give them things to take off their mat, really strong visuals. So for example, when I talk about postural alignment of the spine, I talk about the spine like teacups stacked on top of each other. So when I'm trying to work with somebody to find that, I talk about find your teacups throughout your day. And you can actually visualize your spine is these teacups that are really fragile, and you want to find that alignment so it doesn't tip over.
Thank you for reminding me to sit up straight.
Well, I noticed you did a little shift there. Last year, I went to my dermatologist, and I could tell he had so much, kyphosis, and he had a very anterior head. He's leaning forward because of his work. And I said to him, Dr. blah, blah, Dr. B, I said, you really need to work on your posture, because you're going to get calcifications. You're going to become more stiff, more stuck. Eventually, you may have some vertebral fractures. And so I shared with him one of my favorite cues, which is the pelvis is a flower pot, the spine is a stem, and the head is a flower. And if you think about putting your stem in your flower pot, your flower on top of your stem, it's a really great way to find that alignment of head, torso, and pelvis. And when I came back in my next visit, he said, Debbie, I have a photo of my cervical spine in my office, and underneath is your name. And all day long, I am finding that alignment. And he said, you need to go teach this to other surgeons. He goes, we need this.
It's really interesting. And so many chiropractors and other healthcare professionals, and I've been guilty of this as well, is ignoring to a greater or lesser degree proper structure or proper posture. And I kind of contribute it to, when we grew up, or I grew up, you're, a generation or two younger than me, but we were told by our parents always to sit up straight. Grandma would hit me on the back of the head and tell me to sit up straight. And I never really understood why. I thought it was because they just didn't want me to slouch. But now, as I've looked at over 100,000 x-rays in my office, and I see where the structure is off. I can see when the posture is off, how those bones start to grind and wear out and the spurs occur. That the nerves that come out of there get damaged, and those nerves are life, and those nerves communicate back and forth to the organs, to the limbs, to so many different communication systems, excuse me. And so I'm realizing I'm starting to teach it a lot more to my patients than I have in the past. It's right at 20 minutes, so we're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be back in just a minute. Hello, this is Dr. Duncan McCollum. We are back, and I'm speaking with Debbie Robinson. We've been talking about osteoporosis and the different aspects of it and what we can do about it. It's kind of interesting. We would want to talk about structure and flexibility, and Debbie, I'd like to have you let them know where they can find you, because I think your website has a lot of great information on it. So why don't we do that? How can our audience find you, Debbie?
So my name is Debbie Robinson, and I spelled Debbie, D-E-B-I. My website is debbierobinson.com. So DEBIROBINSON.com. And Duncan, if I could just reference something that you were speaking about before the break, you were talking about the cervical spine x-rays that you've looked at over the years and the realization of the importance of posture. And I wanted to say that one thing that I share with my students and that I learned in my training is the cervical spine. There's 7 bones in the cervical spine. And you were talking about how the nerves and even vessels travel through the spine that are so important, our main vessels. So one thing that I learned that I love to share is that C, 3, 4, and 5 keeps us alive. because
Yeah.
the phrenic nerve, which is for the diaphragm, the primary breathing muscle in the body, and also part of that whole relaxation, repairing, healing zone of the parasympathetic nervous system, that comes out of cervical spine 3, 4, and 5. And then with posture in the front of the chest, that whole brachial plexus area, this little tiny opening of the nerves that actually supply the hands and the arms. And especially now that we're home so often, what I've heard, the main complaint I hear is shoulder and neck and upper back tension, and then tingling and all that referred and impinged aspects that can happen. So it's really important because the posture, the physical aspects of posture can actually affect the physiology and the biochemistry and how you feel mentally and emotionally. So
Yeah,
it may seem like a
absolutely.
little thing, but it's a big thing.
Well, believe me, it is a big thing. Those same nerves also supply, like you said, they go to the thyroid gland and the parathyroid gland, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And they also go to your heart and lungs. So, I think sometimes people have a disconnect with the nervous system and the organs of the body. They think if I have pain, I have a pinched nerve. You can have a pinched nerve or pressure on a nerve without any pain because there's like over 10 different functions of a nerve. One of them is pain. It could be limb position, hot, cold, vibration, balance. And then the rest of them go to the organs and the blood vessels and all that. So overall health is so important to be able to look at all the different aspects. Dr. Fung, we just listened to Dr. Jason Fung for a minute, part of an interview I did with him. And he was talking about diabetes and that when one of the problems with diabetes is you don't have enough insulin to get the sugar out of the blood. And so the general Western philosophy is just to give the body other insulin, man-made insulin, to help push the rest of the sugar out of the blood. But the real point, which Dr. Fung said, is look, you can continue to give people insulin to keep the blood sugar level straight, but you're not fixing anything. You're just causing the body to take that sugar out of the blood and you're putting it into more and more fat cells and you're getting bigger and bigger. So you're not really getting healthier. You're just kind of keeping that certain level of sugar alive. And we know that diabetes is the #1 cause of preventable blindness, limb amputation. It affects the digestive system, and it's a terrible thing. And 60% of the people in the United States are diabetic or pre-diabetic, 60%. And the reason I bring that up is because we're talking about something that allows calcium in or out of the body, in and out of the bones, because calcium is predominantly stored in the bones, but it's used for almost every chemical response in the body. It's in all neurotransmitters, it's in all hormones, it makes your muscles work, keeps your heart functioning. And so calcium is something that we need a good supply of it, but we have a huge reservoir of it too, which is in our bone. And so a lot of times people take different supplements, or let's just say pharmaceutical, synthetic, if they've been diagnosed with something like osteoporosis. And by the way, we're not giving any medical advice. We're just basically giving information for you to look into this yourself. And believe me, you can find this information. But when you take estrogen helps keep calcium in your bones. And it might sound like a great thing, but your bone is supposed to ebb and flow. Calcium is supposed to move in and out of your bones. And you want to replace the calcium in the bones. You don't want to have it just sit there. So it's really important to understand what affects calcium in absorption in your spine. And we know that there's a couple organs responsible for it. The thyroid gland and the parathyroid gland are really important. Those are right at your neck, and those are C3, 4, 5 that you were talking about earlier, cervical spine nerves. And the parathyroid hormone, the parathyroid, there's 4 of them, and that's one of the most common cancers now for women is parathyroid, or tumors anyway. But I think we were talking about that before. But so that parathyroid hormone is designed to pull calcium out of your bone. And then the thyroid hormone has, or the thyroid gland has something called calcitonin, which puts the calcium in. Not to get mixed up on this, but the reason I'm bringing this whole thing up is if your body can't use the insulin hormone correctly, meaning insulin isn't working on the cells, the other hormones aren't working on the cells either, because all the receptor sites get polluted and plugged up with toxins. And this is the chemical end of this whole thing, which, you know, you guys that have listened to this show a long time know that I talk about getting the heavy metals and the toxins out of your body and out of your glands. So I'm just going to carry on this thought for a minute, then I'll bring Debbie's thought in on it. But if we're unable to, well, a couple other things that really affect the thyroid gland, which is really important in metabolism and in calcium absorption or not, is the fact that iodine helps convert the thyroid hormone into to a functional hormone. The only problem with this is that there's 3 or 4 other elements in the same part of that periodic chart. They're called halon gases that actually can compete with your iodine, like bromide in your hot tubs, chloride in your water, fluoride in your water. They will all disrupt the thyroid gland, and that can affect your body's ability to keep the calcium in your body as well. So, or in your bones. So when we're talking about trying to do posture and exercises to strengthen your spine, we also have to look at what's going on with the chemistry that help your body retain the calcium or get rid of it at the same time.
Yeah, it's about balance. And yoga, that's what yoga actually is. People think it's something that like skinny girls do on a mat, bending over, touching their toes. And it's really about balancing everything in your life, the energy of digestion, the energy of metabolism. Actually, bone remodeling is a process of metabolism. You're speaking about blood sugar regulation. That again is metabolism. It's the body's ability to balance so many factors that it actually knows how to do if we give it the chance and if we take all of the hurdles out of the way. And what happens here with allopathy, with modern medicine, the only thing we really know how to do is to give a medication for one specific aspect of that imbalance. And it, you know, if you had a bathtub full of holes, it's plugging up one of the holes, but it's not taking care of all of the other imbalances and all of the other leaks in the system. And it's back to that triangle. There's physical leaks that lead to bone density. There's biochemical leaks that lead to bone density. And then there's mental, emotional, where either you're holding yourself a certain way posturally, or that chronic stress loop, which affects insulin, which affects blood sugar regulation. It really is this orchestra that takes place. So we have to get to everything. We can't just do one thing and expect that we're going to solve the equation. It's about finding balance in all aspects of our body, our mind, and all aspects of us.
Absolutely. And, you know, exercise and yoga is so important, and the posture, it's just so, it's so difficult. So many patients come into my office with, you know, their heads are forward, rounded backs. And, you know, that is acquired over a lifetime. It didn't just happen one day. It's just, you know, time and gravity are not our friends when it comes to our posture and structure. And so, yeah, so again, we're talking about osteoporosis, you know, things that you can do to reverse it and prevent it. Debbie Robinson is a yoga instructor from Southern California. She works at a local hospital down there. She teaches classes to predominantly over 50, 55-year-olds, but there's no time like the present. And just as an example, things are happening so much younger now in our generation because we have more toxins on this planet than in the history of man, or the human beings, excuse me. And those toxins get in the way of our body's function. They get in the way of our body's ability to absorb and utilize nutrients and you know, all that kind of stuff. And it just is a point, you know, you guys all out there, all you audience know that I talk about cellular detoxification and, you know, all of the environmental toxins that we get from glyphosate to heavy metals. But I think it's really important to talk about lead for a minute here, because lead is very, very toxic. The #1 source of lead toxicity is your mother. it's not anymore. We're not eating lead paint, but it's our mothers who ate lead paint, because it comes down 4 generations through the umbilical cord, along with mercury. And mercury is 50% of your silver fillings are mercury, and that stuff gets stored in your body, in your brain, and in your bones. But particularly lead competes for the same receptor site in the bone as calcium. In fact, lead has a stronger affinity for that receptor site, meaning it can bind stronger. It's like playing musical chairs. If you've got the music stops and there's a lead or a calcium sitting there, the lead gets the seat. And so not only is this going to cause your mineral density of your bones to be weaker, so whether it's osteopenia first and then osteoporosis, but at the same time we want to work on the structure, we have to take a look and see how can we get the heavy toxic stuff out of our body so the body can start to heal itself. So I'm really working with a lot of people on the heavy metal detoxification. Let's find out even if you have it. And then diet is so important, because we know improper diet can cause the bone density to go down.
Yeah, well, actually, there's primary and secondary osteoporosis. Primary is part of the aging process. 5 to 7 years post-menopause is the greatest decrease of bone density in women. Men, it's not until age 70, because that's when they begin to lose the testosterone. Then the secondary osteoporosis is really dietary related for those that have dietary issues with digestion, absorption, assimilation, because if you cannot get the nutrients into your body, then you cannot get the nutrients into your bones. So it becomes not about what we eat, but what we absorb. And some of the things that impede that absorption are, like you're speaking about, all of the toxicity that we're exposed to that we can't see, that may be taking up a receptor site and brought in instead of something else. Like you were talking, that's a great analogy about the musical chairs inside of our bones. I'm certified by Dr. Lauren Fishman. He's a physician in New York for teaching yoga for osteoporosis. And he has an ongoing study that's proven an increase in DEXA scan scores. And he refers to the blood vessels inside the bones, or the sites inside the bones, in the Congo line. Mm-hmm. So he's the Congo line, you're the musical chairs. And I think that's a really great way for people to think about things, that, you know, because it is a dance. We still want there to be a lightheartedness here, and for people to know that they can do something. There's the physical. Yeah. So for that whole, we're talking now about the biochemical, and yeah, that's really, really important, because you have to be able to digest all the great foods you're eating for your bones. And even that includes the supplements that people are taking.
Exactly. And you mentioned, well, let's talk about how we know if we have osteoporosis or osteopenia or not. The most used test right now is called a DEXA scan. And that's basically a way to, it's a double X-ray, and it's a biphoton X-ray that actually can look at the density in your bone. And on an average X-ray, like I look at, you can't even tell if they're osteoporotic or osteopenic until 35% of the calcium is lost out of the bone. So it won't show up on an X-ray definitively until 35% of the bone density is lost. Oftentimes, I mean, unfortunately, the patients come in, especially women in their 50s and above, and they say, well, I sat down in a chair, that's all I can think about, and now I have this tremendous back pain. And we take an X-ray and find out that a vertebra has collapsed in their back. It's like, you know, it's kind of like what is that stuff called? You know, it's like a corrugated box. You sit on it and it squishes. That's what happens to the vertebra when they don't have enough calcium in it. They will collapse. And, you know, most of the time, though, they can still heal pretty well. And based on some of the treatment we do in our office, especially the stem cell machine that I talked about earlier on the commercial, we can help get the area mineralized again. We can help stem cells get in there. We can help get out inflammation and increase blood supply. But the DEXA score, I'm sure any of you women out there that are listening that have had a diagnosis of this, it's a score, they call it a T-score. And between 1 and negative, or -1 and -2.5 is mineral loss. And then they call that osteopenia. When you get below 2.5, that's called osteoporosis. So they can test it. They test your wrist, your hip, and your lumbar spine typically for that. And, you know, you want to be up in the one area. So just so people understand that that's what the normal bone density is on that. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about before we move on again is, you know, what kind of things affect somebody's bone density, and what can we do about it? But we do know that there's 1 out of 2 women over 50 years old will likely have osteopenia-related fracture in their lifetime. It's twice the fracture rate in men. They lose bone density more quickly after, obviously, menopause, but there can be chemical toxicities that cause this as well. Some of the signs of the increased risk of osteoporosis is when you're, it's related to estrogen. When you have irregular periods start, or you begin to have the periods that last longer than normal, these are a good sign. If you have lost your ovaries, then you don't have the estrogen supply that you need to, even though your adrenal glands is supposed to take over, and every cell in your body is supposed to make some estrogen, but it's often not enough, especially with the stress load that is causing our cortisol level to go up. Corticosteroids, which people get a lot of shots of, or they take it for pain, also decreases bone density. So these are some of the things that you might take a look at and go, gosh, you know, these are some of the things that I have. Immediately after menopause, like you mentioned, is the quickest bone loss. And then problems with the parathyroid gland. That's those little teeny glands right next to the thyroid gland that sometimes people have hyperparathyroidemia, which means that the parathyroid glands aren't working well. You could be lacking vitamins like the vitamin D, vitamin K, a lot of the oil-based vitamins. But this all comes down to what you mentioned before, which is digestion and the gut. And today, one thing that's really interesting is when you're under times of stress, when you have a fight or flight mechanism, and we've been chased by a virus we couldn't see, touch, taste, feel, and even know if it was there for 9 months. So we've been under an incredible fight or flight load, almost nonstop. Your body only has to run faster than the bear. So it shuts down your digestive system, it shuts down your immune system and your cognitive reasoning temporarily until the bear goes away. Well, temporarily for 9 months or more, now 12 months, I think, has been damaging to our immune system, exactly what we don't want to have weakened, damaging to our digestive system and our cognitive function. So, and we're talking about the mental part, you know, we have to be happy. We got to get those feel-good transmitters going. So such a huge predominance of our country has something called leaky gut syndrome. It's like an inflammation in the gut because of the toxins that we've eaten, the sugar, the alcohol, which has been much more abused when people are at home. They're drinking a lot more alcohol. They're eating more sugar because they're baking. They're probably not eating organic, so they're using flours and gluten. All of this stuff is going to leach calcium out of your bones. So I know that's a lot to take in right there, but you know, it's so important that we take a look at all aspects of this, because you know, if we just say there's 10 factors and that's an arbitrary number affecting your bone density, and maybe 3 of them are really low, well, don't go concentrating on the ones that aren't too bad. Let's go after the emergencies. And if you're having digestive problems, if you're having postural problems or stiffnesses, if you're having trouble with your immune response, your energy level, all these things are indications that these hormones aren't working well and they're not functioning well. So we really need to pay attention and know what to do about that.
Yes, osteoporosis is a lifestyle disease. It is not just one thing. It's not just because I'm getting old. It is a lifestyle disease. And because it is a lifestyle disease, we can learn new habits, behaviors, and lifestyle choices to reverse or to stop the progression of, and then to fortify all the other aspects that are important. The balance, the coordination, the strength, because it's not really about bone density. It's about bone strength. How strong are your bones? So yeah, wow. It's a lifestyle disease. So we actually have the ability to make shifts in our osteoporosis, in our bone health.
Yes. So we're talking with Debbie Robinson. She's a coach, yoga instructor. She works with people with osteoporosis and helps them through yoga and other information be able to reverse the problems, or at least make sure it's not getting any worse. And she's right. It is a lifestyle disease. And there's so many things that you can do. You know, the thing is that so many people are symptom oriented. They only do something when they have a symptom. And the perfect example is a cavity in your mouth. You might have a cavity for 3 years and have no symptoms. And then all of a sudden it gets to the nerve root and it's an emergency. Also, 50% of the first signs of heart disease in Santa Cruz County, 50% of the first sign of heart disease, the first symptom is death. So, you know, you don't want to wait for a fracture. Yeah, you don't want to wait to have a fracture. You don't want to wait to have to have a tooth extracted, or you don't want to wait to have, you know, heart attack. All of that stuff can be, if you really pay attention on how to get healthy, we can make a big difference. And there's a lot of people out there that can. And that's why we really appreciate people like Debbie out there. And I do want to mention, I think that I should probably mention at this juncture, since we're talking about osteoporosis, which is typically an age-related lifestyle disease, my new book, Turn Back Your Biological Clock, is available for free for any listeners. So Turn Back Your Biological Clock basically goes through a lot of these detox methods that I was doing. It talks about a lot of posture stuff. It talks about preventative measures. And this one is put together as a story, so it's really fun to read. It's not technical. But if you just go to McCollumWellness.com/clock, CLOCK, like Turn Back Your Biological Clock, McCollumWellness.com/clock, you can download a copy of that for free. Please do tell your friends, anybody you know that has these kind of problems. Let's get them the information. They can read it at their home. They don't have to go anywhere. Most patients say, oh, I'm having an appointment with my medical doctor today. Oh yeah, did they look at your arm? Well, yeah, through the screen, you know, you don't even get to go in and see them. Our office has remained open throughout the problem that we've had. We have 3 doctors there. We're busy all the time. We're doing so much stuff to help people. Again, Debbie, why don't you tell us how they can find you? And then we'll end up on just a few, whatever thoughts we think is going to be most important to go.
Okay. So just you began this by asking me why. What's my passion? What's my why? My why is because 25% of the people that fall and have a hip fracture do not survive. And another 25% go into a home to never, ever come out. And the greatest, we have a greater risk of having a hip fracture than we do of breast, uterine, and ovarian cancer combined. So I believe that I have the insight because I was broken at 50, couldn't move, couldn't do much. And I have the foresight because I see bodies and I experience what is ahead of you if you don't do something about it. So I do have a free webinar on bone health lifestyle coming up on March 30th. And the information for everything that I offer is on DebbieRobinson.com, DEBI Robinson.com.
So DebbieRobinson.com. And so they can sign up for your webinar there?
They can sign up for my free webinar. Yes, that's there.
That's awesome. So it's free. I like free.
And I also have a free book that I put together that's a pretty nice book on lots of things about osteoporosis. And Dr. Fishman has a 12 pose practice that he's had in studies since the early 2000s. So like 15 years now. I think he's had over 150,000 hours of studies. And I have images of those 12 poses. I also have YouTube, my YouTube channel, Debbie Robinson Wellness. I've created, well, I teach live every week. I teach live classes every week. But I have a couple of recorded classes that are an hour-long class for osteoporosis. I have many offerings out there. So hopefully somebody that wants that can find exactly what they need.
You know, my audience knows this. You may not. I broke my back when I was 12 years old, fell out of a tree. So I have, you know, damage to my spine. And thank God chiropractic has really, you know, saved my life in more ways than one. But I always kind of joke when people ask me if I want to do yoga or do yoga. I go, well, last time I did, a fire department had to come get my foot from behind my neck. But and because I always go in and I try to do too much too quickly, you know, and I think that's like most of us. We go to the gym and then we work out and hurt ourselves again. You try to do a diet, you do it too quickly, and then you release toxins because toxins are stored in fat cells and you get sick or you don't win. Because your body won't release the toxin, so you don't lose weight. So if somebody were going to go, okay, this is a time, okay, it looks like things calming down out there in the world. I don't know if the groundhog saw a shadow or not. Do you?
No, I don't know.
I usually do, but at the same time, it's like we're coming out of our groundhog hole now as people, as all of this stuff is loosening up a little bit. So. If somebody were to go, I want to start to try to do yoga. I've never done it before. It sounds like something that I could use not only for my flexibility, for my frame of mind, and whatever else you want to add to that. What would be your recommendations on how they go about starting this?
Well, I would say that yoga is actually more about the mind than the body, and it's about managing your stress. So that whole entire cortisol limbic loop process that you spoke about that eventually goes to blood sugar and everything else is involved. So that's really the primary. So the most advanced posture you could do in a yoga class is to sit still and breathe. So that's the most advanced, not leg behind the ear. And then what I would say is what I tell all my students is that slow and steady wins the race. Rome was not built in a day. Check your ego at the door, especially for you boys, because that testosterone comes in the room and you have to prove that you can. You spoke earlier about gravity is not our friend. Make gravity your friend by being on your back on the floor, by starting to move joints, lubricate joints. When we lie with our backs on the floor in a supine position, we actually take away that compressive force from above. We allow the fluids that were squished out of our discs, which I call jelly donuts, all of the fluids that were compressed out of the vertebra into the surrounding tissue can now come back in and nourish the bones. They can hydrate. And then also you can work on your posture and work on things that may be a little challenging in a seated or a standing position on your back, starting to lubricate your joint, move your hips, starting to actually, move apart or break apart the pieces, the stickiness. I call it the cobwebs that get inside of our tissue, those adhesions that need to be broken up, which come from that chemical place, right? That's where the bones send the calcium to the rescue. And so you start to remove the cobwebs and you do it slowly but surely, and you do it safely. And you'll be amazed at the physical, biochemical, and mental, emotional way you will feel and begin to feel, because it's a lifestyle practice. We're dealing with lifestyle diseases, whether that's osteoporosis, diabetes, hypertension, cancer. So we take this lifestyle practice and we work on the positive, healthy habits. So my suggestion would be to be on the floor, to begin on the floor.
That's exactly right. To lie down on the floor and relax, take some deep breaths all the way down to your belly. And, it's so important. How many of us just don't take a minute to do that? And I try to do that. I don't do it every day because I'm running around, doing everything. But I try to as much as I can, and I get adjusted twice a week because my broken back, thank God I have 2 doctors working for me, but that just really keeps my joints going as well. It's kind of funny. You mentioned slow and steady wins the race. And I thought, well, whoever would have thought that, 60 years later, reading that Bugs Bunny and Goofy comic book about Goofy winning the race while Bugs Bunny was running would come in so handy and be such a teaching lesson.
The more advanced you become at yoga, the slower the practice becomes. And that's because you bring in wisdom. And I don't know about you, but I would say that as I get older, I do become more wise. And I love that. I love that acceptance of, okay, I can go slow. And that is the best thing for me anyway. So I love getting a new student in. I love the trepidation and the fear and the caution that somebody comes to me with. And then I love to help make them feel comfortable and start to bring that movement, that safe movement and that strengthening into their body. And then all that calming aspect into their mind.
Yeah, well, this is great. This is Debbie Robinson. I'm Dr. Duncan McCollum. This is McCollum Wellness Radio. Saturday here in Santa Cruz, and Debbie's down in Los Angeles somewhere. The 310 area code. She works online, teaches her classes online. She works with the hospitals. She's worked with some pretty amazing people in the field of osteoporosis and health. And she's going to give her website one more time. We're almost at the end of the hour here.
It's www.debbierobinson.com.
That's awesome. I love that. And then they can sign up for your free webinar there. And
Free
then,
webinar, yeah.
And a whole bunch of other stuff. And
Yes.
then please, if you haven't done this already, go and download my new book, book number 6. And it's called Turn Back Your Biological Clock. You can get it at mccollumwellness.com/clock. And it's going to help with a lot of the information that we are going through here today. Let's see. So what would be, I want to say one thing. It's really interesting. We met on this new app called Clubhouse, which is pretty amazing. But I was listening into this show called The Breakfast with Champions yesterday. I don't know if you've checked that out. If you haven't, I recommend it. And there was a gentleman named Les Brown on there, who's a famous speaker and enthusiast. I don't know exactly what to call him, but his parting statement, and this is something I can see in you, and I try to live up to this as much as I can, but they asked him, what would be your final statement? And he goes, aspire to inspire until you expire. And I thought that was just such a cool thing. If every one of us just decided to aspire to inspire people until we expire, we'd be in such a nicer place, and this would be a much more beautiful planet. Well, we're about to the end here. Debbie, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. I appreciate your husband, Scott, helping us kind of debug all of this technical stuff so that we could have a great show. And definitely like to have you back again. DebbieRobinson.com, and you can learn about her practices, her yoga practices and other teachings. And this is Dr. Duncan McCollum, McCollum Wellness Radio. And I'm so glad everybody tuned in. Come try the stem cell machine, $49 still. We're just seeing remarkable results there, because you need to be able to move in order to exercise. And if you're in pain, oftentimes you can't exercise, and it becomes a cascading effect of not a very fun life. So we want to help you reverse your life. Josh, we're ready to go. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Debbie. We'll talk to you all soon.
Thank you. Thank you.